Welcome, everyone, to the All Sorts podcast. Today, we're diving deep. The name Assassin. It immediately conjures up these dramatic, shadowy images, doesn't it?
It really does.
You've seen it in movies, maybe played the video games, read books. It's a name absolutely steeped in legend and, frankly, fear. But what's the actual history behind this notorious name? Who are the people behind all the myths?
That's exactly the deep dive we're taking today.
Sure.
You've shared a stack of sources with us, a short history, details about Alamut Castle, information about the legends themselves, and really importantly, perspectives from modern scholars who've been, chipping away at this history.
Right.
Our mission is to move past the sensational legends, really, and try to uncover the complex, often challenging history of the community behind the myths. The Nizari Ismailis.
Okay, let's unpack this. And right up front, we have to talk about one of the biggest hurdles in understanding this history.
The sources themselves.
That's right.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental challenge. Key historical sources from the Ismailis themselves, things like the vast libraries at Fatimid Cairo and the really famous one at Alamut Castle. Well, they were tragically destroyed.
Wow.
So for centuries, this meant historians were basically forced to rely heavily on accounts written by their enemies, people who, let's face it, had every reason to paint them in the worst possible light.
That makes sense.
And this immediately tells you why separating historical fact from sensational legend is so difficult. It's also why modern scholarship, which has been painstakingly uncovering and using newly found Ismaili texts, is just so vital.
So if we want to understand who these people were, we need to go right back to their roots. Where do they emerge from within the broader landscape of Islam?
Okay, so they emerged from within Shia Islam. This branch, it originated from the belief in the leadership of infallible Ali Imams, descendants of the Prophet Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, Ali.
Right, the Imams.
And central to this belief is the idea that these Imams possess special, divinely inspired religious knowledge, or ilm.
And the split that eventually leads to the Ismailis, that happens around a succession dispute.
That's right. After the death of the sixth Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq, there was a divergence. Some followed his son Musa al-Kazim. That's the line that leads to the later Twelver Shia.
Okay.
Others believe the emet passed to his other son, Ismail, or, after Ismail reportedly died, to Ismail's own son, Muhammad. The earliest Ismailis were actually divided over this for a bit, but eventually they sort of coalesced around Muhammad as the rightful imam.
And they faced intense pressure, like right from the start, from the ruling Abbasid Caliphate.
Oh, severe persecution. For almost 150 years, the Ismailis and their imams largely remained hidden, operating underground. This is known as the Dawar al-Sat.
The period of concealment.
Exactly, the period of concealment. Just think about what 150 years of being underground does to a community's structure, its communication, its ability to preserve its identity, its beliefs, all while staying hidden from a hostile state. It's really a remarkable feat of organization and faith.
But they didn't stay hidden forever. They emerged, and pretty dramatically, too, in the late 9th century. How did that happen?
Well, it was orchestrated by an incredibly effective Ismaili missionary, a Dai, named Abu Abdullah al-Shi. He traveled to North Africa and managed to convert the Kutama Berbers, who were, renowned warriors.
Ah, so they gained military strength.
Precisely. This conversion wasn't just religious. It gave the Ismailis a powerful military force.
And that force led to the establishment of the Fatimid Caliphate. That sounds like a huge moment.
Absolutely monumental. In 909 CE, they proclaimed their hidden imam, Abdallah al-Mahdi, as the first imam caliph of the Fatimid state. And this was historically significant because it was the first time since Imam Ali himself that a Shia lead from the Al-Bayt, the Prophet's household, actually led a major Muslim state. They weren't just a persecuted minority anymore. They were rulers.
Now, while the Fatimids are rising, there's this other group linked to early Ismailism, the Crusaders. Their actions kind of muddy the waters, don't they?
They really do. The Crusaders had separated from the main Ismaili movement quite early on, and they didn't acknowledge the Fatimid imams. But they did things like attacking Mecca, even taking the sacred black stone of the Kaaba.
Which must have shocked everyone.
It absolutely shocked the Muslim world. And of course, it was seized upon by anti-Ismaili writers to condemn Ismailism broadly and try to link these, extreme actions to the ruling Fatimid imams, even though the Crusaders didn't follow them. It was a classic sort of guilt by association tactic used to demonize the Fatimids.
What's fascinating about the Fatimid era, though, especially after they moved their center to Egypt, is their reputation for tolerance. That seems unusual.
Yes, the sources really highlight their renowned policy of tolerance towards other religious and ethnic communities within their vast empire. In the medieval context, this was really quite rare, quite progressive.
And they weren't just tolerant, they were big on learning, too.
Enormously so. They established prominent centers, like the Dar al-Ilm in Cairo. What's particularly striking about the Dar al-Ilm, I think, is that it was apparently open to scholars of all persuasions, and its massive library was accessible to everyone.
Really? Open to all?
That's what the sources suggest. This policy of openness to knowledge, even from different viewpoints, was incredibly significant and seems deeply connected to their core belief in the importance of ilm, that special knowledge.
And we see prominent Ismaili intellectuals and figures from this period, like the poet and philosopher Nasser Khusraw, and even Hassan-i, who becomes incredibly important later.
Exactly. This was a vibrant, intellectually fertile period for the Ismailis. Though, eventually internal strife and external pressures led to the decline and collapse of the Fatimid Caliphate in 1171.
So the Fatimid line eventually falls, but another branch, the Nizari branch, emerges earlier, after another succession dispute. And this is where we finally get to the legendary Alamut castle.
Right. The Nizari branch follows Imam Nizar after a dispute over succession in the late 11th century. And a pivotal figure for this branch in Persia is Hassan-i. In 1090, he captured the seemingly impenetrable Alamut castle high in the Alborz Mountains.
Seemingly impenetrable is the key phrase there, isn't it? How on earth did he take a natural fortress like that?
Well, Alamut is perched high on this massive rock, surrounded by mountains, very few difficult access points. A direct military assault would have been incredibly costly, maybe impossible.
So what did he do?
Hassan-i didn't use brute force. He used infiltration and conversion. He apparently snuck into the region and then, disguised as a schoolteacher, he entered the castle itself.
As a teacher?
Yes. And he quietly spent time converting people from within until he had enough loyal followers to take control without major bloodshed. It was really a strategic masterpiece of subversion, not open warfare.
That's extraordinary. And their military strategy after that seems to have remained largely defensive, relying on this network of castles.
Precisely. Their scattered strongholds across Persia and Syria served as Dar al-Hijra, places of refuge or sanctuary. It's a concept that kind of echoes the Prophet Muhammad's migration, the Hijra to Yathrib, Medina, to escape persecution in Mecca.
Right, the Hijra.
The Nizaris were a minority facing powerful enemies like the Seljuks, and they simply lacked the military strength for open battlefield confrontation. So these decentralized fortresses were absolutely vital for their survival, providing these pockets of secure territory.
And at the core of their belief system during this early Alamut period was this doctrine of talim. What does that mean in this context?
Okay, talim. It stresses absolute loyalty to the sinless and infallible imam or his representatives, who are known as hujjas. These figures are believed to possess that special religious knowledge, the ilm, that's necessary for true guidance. Now, for a scattered, persecuted community whose imams were often in hiding, this doctrine wasn't just theology, it was a core survival strategy.
How so?
Well, it provided the necessary unity, discipline, and structure under the guidance of figures like Hassan-i, who acted as the imam's hujja when the imam himself was in concealment. It held everything together.
It sounds like Alamut was more than just a military stronghold then. It was also a center for intellectual life.
Oh, it was incredibly important in that regard. Just like the Fatimid centers before it, the Alamut Library was renowned. It was a center of intellectual development, attracting scholars of various persuasions, apparently, and a repository of knowledge for the community.
Which, of course, makes its ultimate destruction all the more devastating later on.
Exactly, a huge loss.
Okay, so we have this complex historical picture, a persecuted community, rich intellectual tradition, brilliant strategists, hidden imams, mountain fortresses. Now let's tackle the name everyone knows. Assassins. Where does that dramatic, fearful name actually come from?
Right, the name. Well, assassin derives from the Arabic term hashishi. Modern scholarship, people like Bernard Lewis, notably, suggest this term was first used pejoratively, basically as an insult.
An insult.
Yes, by a Fatimid caliph back in 1122, referring to the Syrian Nizaris specifically.
So it wasn't necessarily about hashish the drug then?
It likely meant something more like outcasts, rabble, or maybe unorthodox followers. The link to hashish, the actual drug, seems pretty tenuous, especially that early on.
But the name stuck.
It did. This term hashishi was picked up by non-Ismaili historians who were often hostile, and then later by European travelers like Marco Polo during the Crusades. They linked the term to the Nizari Fidas, the devotees who carried out these dangerous missions. And that connection is what fueled the widespread sensational legends we still hear today.
And those legends are incredibly vivid and specific. Tell us about them.
Oh, they are. They're all sort of interrelated and very dramatic. You have the training legend, the paradise legend, the hashish legend, the death leap legend.
Quite a list.
The most popular version, the one significantly spread by Marco Polo and later popularized in the West by a writer named Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall, involved the idea that fidais were drugged with hashish by their leader, the Old Man in the Mountain, which is itself a corruption of the Arabic title for Hassan-Saba.
Okay.
They were supposedly taken, while drugged, to a secret garden of paradise, a literal, physical garden filled with beautiful things, food, wine, lovely maidens, where they experienced ecstatic bliss.
A physical paradise.
Yes. And then they were told that if they carried out assassination missions faithfully, they could return to this paradise permanently after death.
So the core myth is that these were basically brainwashed, drugged fanatics motivated by the promise of a literal earthly pleasure garden.
Exactly. It's a story designed to make their actions seem completely incomprehensible, sinister, and detached from any genuine religious or political motivation.
But modern scholarship really takes these legends apart, piece by piece. What have they found?
Well, scholars like Farhad Daftari, Bernard Lewis, Peter Willey, they've meticulously deconstructed these myths. Archaeological evidence, for instance, like Peter Willey's survey of Alamut before its destruction.
What did that find?
It found no trace or mention of such elaborate gardens, just functional structures, sophisticated water storage systems, and of course the important library. The legends simply aren't supported by the physical evidence at Alamut itself.
And they don't really align with the actual Ismaili beliefs either, do they?
Not at all. Ismaili esoteric doctrine has a very sophisticated symbolic understanding of paradise. It's seen as a spiritual state, not a physical place you can build. A fidai deeply steeped in that tradition, understanding the inner meanings, batan of faith, likely wouldn't believe that a physical garden was the ultimate spiritual paradise they sought after death. It fundamentally misunderstands their theological framework.
So if the legends are wrong, and they weren't drugged into fanaticism by the promise of a fake garden, what was the real motivation for these incredibly dangerous, often suicidal missions?
The more plausible explanation, the one supported by their history and doctrines, really points to deep religious passion and an unwavering commitment to their community and their imam. Remember, they faced severe existential persecution from powerful enemies.
Right, constant threat.
Their willingness to undertake these missions stemmed from a profound sense of duty, a duty to protect their fellow Ismailis and ensure the survival of their faith and leadership. It was a powerful combination of religious devotion and, frankly, strategic necessity.
Let's talk about that strategy then, the reality of their tactics. Because the legends paint them as these indiscriminate killers, striking from the shadows.
And that's another significant distortion. Their actual tactic, the one that earned them their fearsome reputation, was highly selective assassination. They targeted prominent political and military figures who were direct adversaries of the community.
Specifically adversaries.
Yes, primarily powerful Seljuk rulers and viziers, but also, during the Crusades, some Crusader leaders.
And they targeted specific individuals, not civilians?
Emphatically not civilians. The sources make it clear their aim was pragmatic and focused. Remove key enemies who posed an immediate threat, deter future attacks through psychological impact, and secure the survival of their scattered community when they lacked the resources for open warfare against much larger armies. Indiscriminate mass slaughter would have achieved nothing for them strategically and seems completely incomprehensible given their objectives.
What was their preferred method? How did they operate?
The dagger was their preferred weapon. And interestingly, often these acts were carried out very publicly, not to cause random terror, but to maximize the psychological impact on the ruling elite and demonstrate their vulnerability, showing that the fidais could reach anyone, anywhere.
And they didn't try to escape.
Crucially, no. The fidais typically did not try to escape after the act. They fully expected to be captured and killed, usually immediately, by the victim's guards or perhaps angry crowds. This willingness to sacrifice their lives was a core part of the intended psychological shock.
Are there notable examples of targets mentioned in the sources?
Yes, quite a few. The powerful Seljuk vizier Nazim al-Mulk is often cited, although there's some historical debate about whether the Ismailis were truly responsible for his death or if it was just conveniently attributed to them later.
Okay.
They also targeted Crusader leaders like Conrad of Montferrat, and significantly, they targeted Saladin.
Saladin. The great Saladin was a target. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was. There were at least 2 known attempts on his life. What's fascinating is that after Saladin besieged their stronghold at Masyaf in Syria, he abruptly lifted the siege. There was clearly some kind of communication or negotiation.
What happened?
Well, there's a famous story, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, about him waking up in his tent at Masyaf to find fresh, hot scones, which was sort of an Ismaili calling card, a distinctively Ismaili dagger stuck in the ground beside his bed, and a threatening note.
Wow. Right beside him.
Right beside him, it's a vivid illustration of their psychological warfare, showing him they could get to him even in the heart of his own camp. It's a powerful message that could deter further aggression perhaps more effectively than simply killing him would have.
So the psychological aspect was huge, showing their enemies exactly how vulnerable they were.
Exactly. Leaving that dagger, leaving that note, it was a calculated move to sow fear and deter hostile actions without necessarily needing to follow through with the assassination every time. And because their methods were so precise, so effective, and the fear they inspired was so great, well, almost any significant political murder in the Islamic lands during this tumultuous period ended up being attributed to the Ismailis.
Whether they did it or not.
Right, which further inflated their reputation and fed into those legends.
Despite their strategic brilliance and resilience, though, they eventually faced a force they simply couldn't withstand: the Mongols.
Yes, the devastating Mongol invasion under Hulagu Khan in the mid-13th century. That marked a truly catastrophic turning point for the Nizari state centered at Alamut.
The siege of Alamut itself in 1256.
That's correct. The last imam present at Alamut, Rukn al-Din Kursha, apparently hoping to spare his community further bloodshed, eventually surrendered after negotiations with Hulagu failed. What followed was just tragic.
The destruction.
Yes. The castle and, critically, its irreplaceable library were deliberately destroyed. The main account we have of this comes from the Mongol chronicler Juvayni, and we should always remember, his account is strongly anti-Ismaili. He had a definite bias.
And the destruction wasn't just limited to the castles, was it?
Far from it. The Mongol conquest was followed by horrific massacres of the Nizari population. In some regions, like Quistan in Persia, estimates suggest possibly nearly 100,000 Ismailis were killed. It was a near-extermination event for the community in Persia and Syria.
How on earth did the community survive that level of devastation? It sounds impossible.
It really speaks volumes about their resilience and their deep-seated community organization, doesn't it? Survival was achieved largely through migration. Many managed to escape the killing zones and fled to regions where existing Ismaili communities were already present, places like Afghanistan, Central Asia, and particularly the Indian subcontinent.
And they relied on taqiyya again.
Critically, yes. Yeah. Taqiyya, that practice of concealment we saw earlier during the Dar al-Satr, the first period of concealment.
So hiding their identity.
Exactly. Practicing concealment of their true religious identity to survive in hostile environments. In Persia, for centuries, they often outwardly appeared as Sufis to avoid persecution under various Sunni dynasties. Later, under the Safis, who established Twelver Shi'ism as the state religion, they often adopted the guise of Twelver Shia.
For centuries.
For centuries. Yeah. In the Indian subcontinent, some communities adapted by adopting local customs, sometimes appearing outwardly as part of the majority Hindu community, while maintaining their Ismaili beliefs and practices inwardly. Imagine maintaining your core identity and faith for that long while, outwardly appearing to be something else. It required incredible discipline, adaptation, and community cohesion.
And somehow the line of imams survived this as well.
Miraculously, yes. The Qasim Shahi line of imams, which is the line that continues to the present day with the current Aga Khan, traces its lineage back through Imam Rukn al-Din Kursha's young son, Shams al-Din Muhammad. He is said to have survived the Mongol massacres and lived secretly, initially disguised as an embroiderer.
An embroiderer, wow.
So the post-Alamut period saw the community fragmented geographically but adapting constantly. Distinct regional communities formed, like the Khojas in the Indian subcontinent, who developed their own unique traditions, like their beautiful hymn-like poems, the Jainans. These often incorporated local cultural and religious themes while still preserving core Ismaili teachings.
Let's fast forward now to the modern era. This period seems to mark another huge shift, largely initiated by the figureheads known as the Aga Khans.
It really does. The modern period, you could argue, really begins with Aga Khan settling permanently in Bombay, now Mumbai, in 1848. This effectively ended the long Persian phase of the Emirate and anchored the leadership in the Indian subcontinent, where a large, albeit quite diverse, Ismaili community had developed over centuries of migration and conversion.
And even then, solidifying the community's identity after centuries of taqiyya, of concealment, must have presented huge challenges.
Oh, significant ones. After such long periods of outward concealment, sometimes blending almost seamlessly with surrounding Sunni, Twelver Shia, or even Hindu communities, there was bound to be confusion, internal disputes, and external legal challenges regarding their specific identity and who held authority.
Like the Aga Khan case.
Exactly. The famous Aga Khan case in the High Court of Bombay was a landmark legal battle. It ultimately confirmed legally that the Khoja community were indeed Shia Imami Ismailis, and that the Aga Khan was their rightful spiritual authority and leader. It was absolutely crucial for establishing a clear legal identity for the community in the modern colonial world.
The more recent imams, particularly Aga Khan III and the present imam, Aga Khan IV, they seem to have spearheaded this massive effort towards modernization and global organization.
That's really been the defining feature of the modern imam's leadership, particularly over the last century or so. They focused intensely on reorganizing the diverse, scattered communities into a modern, unified global entity. There's been a huge emphasis on achieving high standards of education, health, and social well-being for all Ismailis worldwide.
Which sounds like a huge undertaking.
It was, and is. It was a direct, visionary response to the immense challenges of industrialization, colonialism, decolonization, and now globalization, positioning the community not just to survive, but to thrive and contribute actively in the modern world.
And that really brings us back full circle to that historical emphasis on intellect and education that we saw with the Fatimids and at Alamut, doesn't it?
It's a direct line, absolutely. You see institutions like the Aga Khan Development Network, AKDN, the Aga Khan University, the various academies and institutes. These aren't just modern charitable or educational initiatives plucked out of thin air.
They have roots.
They are deeply rooted in that historical Ismaili commitment to learning, to the importance of the intellect, to achieving a balance between faith and the world, din and dunya, as they'd say, and also to pluralism and tolerance. These modern institutions essentially manifest traditional ethical values like compassion, stewardship, and charitable giving in a modern institutional context, addressing global challenges from poverty and health to education and cultural preservation.
So despite facing just extreme persecution, the destruction of their major centers, centuries of living in concealment, this community hasn't just survived, it's actually emerged as a progressive, globally organized modern community.
Their resilience and adaptability, particularly under the guidance and leadership of the recent Aga Khans, is truly remarkable when you consider the history. They navigated incredibly difficult historical circumstances, resisted fragmentation against huge odds, and have emerged as this vibrant, internationally engaged community.
And it all loops back to where we started, the challenges of understanding this history, because for so long, we really had to rely almost exclusively on hostile accounts, like Giovanni's description of the fall of Alamut.
Exactly. For centuries, that sensationalized image of the assassin was pretty much all that was widely known in the West, and even in parts of the Muslim world. But modern scholarship, thanks to the really painstaking work of uncovering, editing, and analyzing previously inaccessible Ismaili texts, well, it's finally allowing us to see beyond those myths.
To get a clearer picture.
Yes, to understand the historical reality of this incredibly complex, resilient community. It lets us differentiate the strategic actions of a persecuted minority fighting for survival from the exaggerated, fearful legends that were built around them.
So you've really guided us on a journey today that goes far, far beyond those simplified legends of, drugged fanatics and shadowy killers. We've uncovered this rich, complex history of a community marked by intense persecution, but also remarkable survival, a deep intellectual tradition, extraordinary adaptation across centuries, and a profound, continuing commitment to education and social development. It's truly fascinating how powerful popular legends, even ones centuries old, can be, and how completely they can overshadow the historical facts for so long.
It really highlights the critical importance of looking beyond those surface narratives, doesn't it? And engaging with history in a deeper, more nuanced way, actively seeking out the voices and perspectives that were often deliberately suppressed or ignored.
Absolutely. Well, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to ponder. Considering the extreme persecution and the very real existential threats the Nizari Ismailis faced for centuries, how did their strategic use of limited, targeted force used primarily for survival, combined with their unwavering emphasis on intellect, community organization, and adaptability, ultimately contribute not just to their survival, but to their remarkable emergence as a thriving, modern, global community? What lessons might this hold about resilience, about strategy and adaptation in the face of seemingly insurmountable adversity? Something to think about. And on that note, thank you for joining us on this deep dive with the All Sorts podcast. If you found this exploration into history and legend illuminating, please do like this recording, share it with others who appreciate uncovering the stories behind the myths, and subscribe to the All Sorts podcast channel on YouTube for more deep dives like this one.
Yes, your support really helps us continue these conversations. And don't forget to check out our other explorations into fascinating topics we've already covered.
You can also follow the All Sorts podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads for updates and discussions. We appreciate you being part of our community. Until next time.